You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Today on the Useless Information Retrocast, you'll hear stories about a ventriloquist who used his skill to project his voice to avoid a fine imposed by a judge. Or how about an 1885 discussion over why homely girls make better wives? And then there's a story about a majorette who knocked herself out with her own baton. I am Steve Silverman, and in a moment, Jill ChaCha, the host of the podcast Well, That's Interesting, will join me to discuss all of those stories, today's retro sponsor, the question of the day, and so much more. All that is coming up next on the 29th edition of the Useless Information Retrocast.
Useless information.
Just a couple of comments before I roll the audio. First, Jill and I spoke via Zoom for more than 2 hours, so this really is edited down. I took out some of the fluff and, of course, inserted some of the stories that were recorded beforehand. And I have to tell you, this is a lot of fun to record. Jill and I were smiling the entire time, so I hope that joy can be heard throughout the recording. So sit back and enjoy. So Jill, thanks for joining me on this show today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is an honor and a privilege.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I first want to say that my wife and I met you in Washington, D.C. At the podcast convention. And when we left, you were the most memorable person we met, one of the most positive, fun people. So we really, really enjoyed talking with you at the show. So, and I do thank you for doing this with me today.
Well, like I said, it was an honor, and those are just such kind words. I'm glad it was just positive that you thought of me.
Yes. So anyway, I think I explained to you exactly, how this is all set up, and we're just going to take turns with the stories.
Yeah, let's do it.
And I guess we'll dive into the first one. This is from August 5th of 1910 and appeared in the Tacoma Times on page 4. And this is titled, Shall We Have Women Judges? And you're going to take the female role and I'll take the male.
Oh, what a time.
So we'll go with yours.
Let's do it.
Shall We Have Women Judges? By Mrs. Harriet J. Wood, prominent woman lawyer. In the police courts of a large city, there should be a woman judge, or a woman associate on the bench with the presiding magistrate. A large proportion of the prisoners in police courts are women. No matter how depraved a woman may be, it is not right to drag her before a man magistrate to be questioned regarding her conduct in life. If she has left a spark of decency, a shred of refinement, this appearance in court before a man will leave her an utter moral wreck. The judgment passed by a man impresses her with a fine scorn for the court proceeding. She feels that every man here is an enemy, but would be only too quick to catch at a kindly word of advice from a woman she respected. Ultimately, I think there will be a separate court for women, with women attendants and women on the bench. I believe it would lessen crime among women, for there is a deeper and a different shame when a woman is brought before a woman, a shame she would not lightly face. As for a woman's being unable to judge fairly is concerned, that is all bosh. Sex has absolutely nothing to do with judgment passed by a trained mind. When a woman has given proof of her ability and intelligence by passing the same examinations with a man, she should certainly have an equal chance. And another thing, there should be mixed juries. The woman first tried by a woman jury will be the first to be tried by a jury of her peers, as required by law.
And here's the male point of view. It was written by Judge F.B. House, New York State Magistrate. Most decidedly and emphatically not. I can't discuss the matter with anyone resembling a sane tone. Do you want the whole scheme of law and order upset in a community? If not, you don't want women to sit in the courts. I have never seen a woman lawyer, with perhaps one exception, who knew exactly what she was talking about. The trouble with women is this: they are not made to judge. The machinery of their minds is not suited to it. They cannot view a subject from the point of the law. The woman on the bench would be just the same as the woman client or the woman lawyer. She would never be capable of seeing the law as applied to a subject, but would turn it as she thought it ought to apply. Judging is a man's business because his brain is the kind to form judgments. Women are too emotional and are not in the slightest degree fitted for such work. Sympathy is not needed. That's not what a court is for. A court is established that justice may be dispensed, that arguments may be settled, not that women who have willfully misbehaved may have comfort and soft words. An associate woman judge would be, quote, confusion worse confounded, unquote. The judicial machinery would go to pieces like the one-horse shay, but I doubt it would last as long. Such a thing would be impossible, unthinkable, ridiculous. I don't know what you thought. I thought the female portion was pretty dead on. Very modern. The only little thing I noticed about the female point of view is that she was saying that women should have female juries, where today, of course, it's mixed. But the male point of view, holy cow.
I would love to see an experiment if this article could be dropped in a major newspaper, just changing the language slightly so it's somewhat modern, but the point of view is the same.
Mm-hmm.
How horrific would it be that this would probably run and no one would catch it, being from 1910 or the early turn of the century? We're having these discussions. It's horrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I picked out a couple of lines that just really stood out at me. One was that women are too emotional and are not in the slightest degree fitted for such work.
Yes. My favorite part is not only that, but the second line of his article is, I can't discuss the matter with anything resembling a sane tone, which is emotional.
Exactly. We live in a different time. I did look up, by the way, for the state of Washington, the first female justice of the peace was Mildred Henthorne Hamel in 1911. So that's just a year later.
All right.
So she won.
Oh, but the fight continues, man. Let me tell you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the next one, and you're going to read this one.
Absolutely, let's do it.
A Ventriloquist Stay Out, 1941. James Masters, 60, a ventriloquist without a dummy, stirred up mischief in Jolie on Thursday, April 10th, 1941, after having a few drinks. He wandered into a bus depot and began mimicking loudspeaker announcements for arrivals and departures, throwing the station into chaos. Passengers scrambled to board non-existent buses, while others collided with each other, convinced their long-awaited relatives had just arrived. Luggage got tangled, tempers flared, and Masters sat serenely, keeping a straight face through it all. Eventually, the police tracked down the mysterious voice and hauled Masters to headquarters, and there he faced Captain Ernest Overby, who was known for his tough interrogations. But before Overby could start, Masters beat him to it by throwing his voice and conducting his own questioning. "You're drunk," Masters accused himself. "No, I'm not," he answered back. "I just had a few drinks to dull my arthritis." "Don't you agree, Chief?" Overby, momentarily stunned, found himself nodding in agreement, though he didn't say a word. When the captain finally declared that Masters was going to jail, another voice floated up from the basement. "Don't put him in this crummy jug. There are creatures running up the walls." Despite the disembodied plea, Masters was locked up and later brought before Police Judge William Meade. "Fine $3 and costs," the judge ruled, though this time the ventriloquist wasn't the one speaking. "And fine suspended," the court clerk interpreted, watching as Masters breezed out of the courtroom without paying a cent.
I just love that story. I have to tell you, my favorite part was at the end and it's not exactly clear in the story, but my impression was that he was able to throw his voice and say that the case was suspended, or the fine was suspended, and he just walked out the door. Is that the impression you got?
That was, and I'm jealous. I wish I've only been arrested once, and I wish I could have done that.
I'm not going to ask why. Anyway, the one thing that I'm not sure about. No, of course I've seen ventriloquists on TV, and there's a commercial locally for a place called the Wood something. I can't think of it. Anyway, it's a wood cart. It's up near Lake George, New York, and this guy is there with his ventriloquist dummy, and he's not that great at it. And I always joke with my wife, that's a guy you don't want to date. He'd pull out his ventriloquist dummy on the date. But joking aside, I always wondered, even though clearly they're not moving their lips and the dummy's supposed to do the talking, can they really throw their voices across the room? Seems to me it would still emanate from the same place. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a skill. I do believe people could probably do it.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it's possible. I personally haven't experienced that, but I feel like they've done a couple of studies on echolocation and throwing voices. Don't quote me on that, but but I think it's possible.
Yeah, it's a skill I need to learn, I guess.
But you've got the time.
Okay, yeah, retirement. Okay, so let's move on to the next one, and I'm going to do this one. On February 25th of 1979, the Boston Globe ran a story about Jerzy Kosinski's 1969 book Steps, which just happened to snag the National Book Award for fiction. Now, by the time this particular 1979 story had been published, the book had already sold an estimated 400,000 paperback copies, so it was well known to the publishing world. But Steps is no ordinary read. It's a bit weird, unconventional, and unapologetically edgy. Quote, "No one should have trouble recognizing it on a second reading," unquote, quips California writer Chuck Ross. Well, that is everyone except for the 14 major publishers to whom Ross submitted it as a manuscript to. Not even Random House, the original publisher of Steps, recognized their own award-winning book. Can we say oops? The whole strange saga of Ross's experiment, carried out with Kosinski's blessing, was chronicled in the February 12, 1969 issue of New West magazine. Ross's mischievous plan had two parts. First, about 3 years ago, he typed up the first 21 pages of Steps and sent them to a carefully chosen batch of publishers. Hoffman Mifflin's rejection letter explained that they, quote, did not think they could publish it successfully, unquote, even though they had recently racked up praise for publishing Kosinski's other book titled Cockpit. But 21 pages? That's hardly enough to judge a book by, at least according to some editors, and Kosinski agreed. Kosinski explained to Ross that Steps only works through its cumulative effect, so not one to back down, Ross took on the challenge and he retyped the entire novel from start to finish. So this time he submitted it under the fake pseudonym Eric Demos and expanded his list of targets. In May 1977, off went the freshly typed Steps to even more publishers. And within 3 months, the rejection letters, they just came pouring in. Seymour Lawrence, the Atlantic Month Presley, Viking, Knopf, you name it, they all rejected the manuscript. Doubleday, they didn't even bother to open the package, claiming they didn't accept unsolicited manuscripts. Harcourt Brace, they simply lost it. And Random House, the original publisher, they held on to it for 6 months before sending it back with a polite note explaining that it had been sent to the wrong party. At least Houghton Mifflin tried. Someone there wrote, quote, Jerzy Kosinski comes to mind as a point of comparison when reading the stark, chilly episodic incidents you have set down, unquote. Unfortunately, the manuscript struck them as, quote, sketchy and incomplete, unquote. Ross's conclusion, quote, evidently Kosinski's not as good as Kosinski when Demos is the name on the envelope, unquote. If you think publishers were bad, literary agents were even worse. In October, Ross sent the full manuscript to 13 top agents in New York, hoping, for a better response. But did he get any? Of course not. There were more lost manuscripts, more form rejections, and more vague excuses. The most shocking part of this whole experiment is that not a single publisher or agent realized they were holding on to an already published National Book Award winner. Now, to be fair, publishing houses get swamped with unsolicited manuscripts all the time, and mix-ups happen just like this in any other business. But still, Ross's verdict was hard to argue with, quote, The prison system for looking at over the transom material is not working and should be re-evaluated, unquote. The article did acknowledge that part of the problem is that when publishers do read unsolicited submissions, they often pawn them off to their least experienced staff, usually some poor English major fresh out of college. But in the end, Ross's experiment did exactly what it was intended to do, call out the industry's bias and tunnel vision.
Yeah, I would love to see this brought up again, because I don't think the publishing world has changed much since was it 79 when they did this?
Yes.
Yeah, I would love to see that again. I think the results would be the same.
Yeah. Oddly, I've written 3 books, and each time I've never sought to write the book. I've had people contact me about writing the books. So I always consider myself I say that I'm a reluctant author because I had a literary agent in New York City contact me years ago. This was maybe about 1999, 2000, somewhere in there. And this is in the early days of the World Wide Web, and I had my website up, and it was quite popular in those days. And he emails me and he said, "This would make a great book." And I wrote back like, "Nope, I'm not interested in writing a book." Mm-hmm. And so I go into work the next day, and being a teacher, some of my closest friends are English teachers. And they're like, "Are you crazy? We want to write a book, and here's a guy who wants to publish it." So I wrote him back. And I spoke to him, and he said, "Write a proposal." I had no idea, And within a week, he had 3 publishers interested in it. So, as I said, a reluctant author. I can honestly say that I had the #1 Kindle book one week.
Oh my gosh! Congratulations! That's
Yeah, but there's a but to this. There's an asterisk,
let's hear it.
And that is, it was 10 years after the book came out. Because when the first book came out, there were no ebooks. This is about 10 years after the fact, and they were giving it away for free. So that's why it actually was, I never printed this screen, but there was an image showing that it was outselling Tina Fey's book, which was the #1 paid book. I had the #1 free book, but I actually was moving more copies than her.
I'm going to print out like some sort of like certificate or an award for you. World's #1 free writer.
Oddly, it sold like a couple of thousand of print books, even though they were giving it away for free. I guess it was a good move on the publisher's part. It moved a couple of thousand copies, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's good press right there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we'll move on from there. So the next thing I always do is I ask a question of the day. And I've been doing this since I started the podcast nearly 18 years ago. I ask a question, and then at the end of the podcast, we come back and I give the answer. So I'm going to ask you the question, and you're not to respond. Okay, you have to, bite your lip and not reveal the answer quite yet. So, of course, I am certain there were 13 states that originally made up the United States, right?
Yes.
Which state was the 14th state added to the Union? Do you know?
Oh my God.
Well, don't say anything. I'm gonna let everyone else think about it also until the end.
This is embarrassing. All right, 14th state. I really hope that they have that slogan on their license plate or on the flag for the 14th state.
I don't think they do. So anyway, we'll get back to it at the end of the podcast. Okay.
Let's do it. All right. I can't wait to be wrong.
Okay, so now I'll play the commercial for Red Heart dog food. I always put an old commercial from an old radio program in. I don't know why I started doing this, but some people write to me and they say, "I can't stand those commercials. They're so scratchy and the sound is so awful." And then other people write, say, "Can you do a whole episode of just those?" So there's nothing you can do that pleases everybody. So anyway, so I'll play that, and then I'm just going to quickly go through some facts about it, okay?
Let's do it.
This is Alex Dreyer speaking for John Morell and Company and bringing you my weekly news analysis together with latest reports from the fighting and political fronts and our guest commentator, Ralph Howard Peterson, who will speak from the nation's capital. But before we get into the news, here's Charles Irving with a word about Red Heart.
Have you seen the picture of the lovable Cocker Spaniel on page 73 of today's Saturday Evening Post? He's a smart dog because he knows that new 3-flavor Red Heart is the food that will do the most for him. See to it that your dog gets the diet to keep him healthy and happy. New 3-flavor Red Heart, which gives him those 3 different delicious flavors. Diet variety will keep his appetite hearty. And what's more, new 3-flavor Red Heart, the food your dog won't tire of, is the ideal diet for every dog. In a nationwide survey, 94 out of every 100 dogs really went for new Red Heart because of its 3 delicious flavors and its coarse, crunchy texture. Your dog will enjoy it, too. So start now feeding your dog Red Heart. That's it. New 3-flavor Red Heart. Your dealer has it now.
Now, that commercial's from the August 11th, 1945 broadcast of a weekly news summary by Alex Dreyer. And I couldn't find out much on this other than it was recorded in Chicago. He broadcast every Saturday on the NBC radio network, and that he died in the year 2000 at the age of 83. He had a baritone voice, and actually he was baritone, and he was known as the voice. Now, as for the dog food itself, Red Heart dog food, definitely not available today. It was manufactured by John Morrell and Company, which were meat packers, and it came in 3 flavors, beef, fish, and cheese. And it was the most popular dog food in the U.S. from the 1940s through the 1950s. Now, I went to newspapers.com, and I searched for the earliest ad, and that was 1932. And the last ad I could find was 1983. So I'm guessing somewhere around there, the company discontinued it. So I guess, do you have a pet?
Like as we discussed off camera, that I moved to Maine from Brooklyn, New York.
Yes.
And in Brooklyn, I lived in tiny apartments where
Oh, okay.
I could not have a pet. Now I'm in Maine on an island 2 miles out into the Atlantic. Still don't have a pet. However, I do have a crusade of blue jays that demand to be fed every morning, and chickadees and a number of wild birds that have expanded my experience with nature. Let me tell you, they nuthatches, fantastic. They're a very quirky bird that likes to hang upside down on trees.
Yes.
They're adorable. So right now, they're my pets / kids. I have to feed. They demand to be fed every morning. They do hang out like near my bedroom window. They know where I sleep, which is interesting. So they're my brood right now. But yes, my neighbors are, speaking of pets, everyone has chickens, horses, goats. So I can see myself falling into that in a couple of months. Actually, I've already discussed chickens with my partner, so we'll have a couple of hens or something. I'm looking forward to that.
We never had dogs, but well, I should tell you that my parents owned a pet shop for 25 years. So I grew up with animals all around me. Then, as they were getting ready to retire, my brother and I took their business and put it up online. And we owned it. We were both teachers, but in our spare time. And when I say spare time, I'm talking about every waking minute besides when we were teaching, we were running this pet business. We sold it about 10 years ago. I've never had a dog. My parents had a dog when I was growing up, but my wife and I had 3 cats. At this point, they've all passed on, and I'm down to 1 cockatiel.
Oh, what was the name of the pet shop? Do you remember?
Oh, my parents' pet shop? The online, my pet shop or theirs?
Both. Let's hear it. I got to know the name.
Well, my parents was very original, is S&G, because I'm Steve, that was the S, and my brother was Gary, so S&G Pet Center. And the pet shop, the pet business we had online, which was just supplies, it wasn't animals. Obviously, you can't ship animals. That was petdiscounters.com. And we sold it back in 2010. And I have to tell you, working 2 full-time jobs for a decade was quite the burden. We were pretty happy to, we were doing well, but we just decided it was time to get out of the business.
Yeah, 1 job is awful, let alone 2.
Yeah, and a couple came along and they wanted to buy it, and we didn't sell it for a lot of money, but we felt it was time to, just focus on one career and not have 2,
Absolutely, yeah. When you were younger, when your parents had the pet shop, were there any animals that you had an affinity for that like you didn't want to see them go?
No, when they started it, it was just tropical fish.
Oh.
That would have been in the maybe I think 1978. They actually started it in the basement of their house, and it was just a little side thing. My dad and my brother and myself, we had some fish tanks, and the supplies were very expensive. So my dad's like, let's just start a business, and then we can buy the supplies wholesale.
Nice.
And so that's what we did. And my mom, this is in the days when most women didn't work. My mom was working at that time, but she was able to leave the job and they weren't dependent on it. And she ran the business while my dad, who was an electrical contractor, he would go to work every day. And that was basically it until the recession hit at the end of the 1970s, and my dad lost his business, and all of a sudden that became their income.
Yeah.
And they really had hard times financially for many years because of that. But eventually they got the business off the ground. They expanded into having, all the other animals that come along with it. The worst being puppies. They did that for a very short period of time. But it's like having 20 babies. Someone's got to go feed them. Even on Christmas Day, someone's got to go in twice a day and care for them. And it's just kind of, upsetting to see these puppies in these cages. So they got out of that quite quickly.
Right. Right.
And that's what I did when I was growing up.
I know you're a busy man, but if you ever want to write a screenplay or a script, a pet shop in the 70s in a basement, something Netflix would definitely get on. So, especially if you want to throw in a criminal element, that would definitely work.
I should add, one of the crazy parts is when they put the pet shop in the house is my dad added an entrance onto the house. You'd walk in an upstairs portion, then take the steps down into the remainder. And the upstairs portion that he added on had all the saltwater fish in it and all the expensive fish. So these are the big, giant tanks. One day, I was home from college and I was supposed to watch the pet shop because my parents were going to my brother's graduation from college. So my dad and I, we had a little time. So we go over to a plumbing supply to get a part to fix a sink. We come home to fix the sink and we look at the house and there's a car sticking out of the house. Some woman fell asleep at the wheel driving home from work, took a left turn. The road is perfectly straight. She took a left turn right into the front of the store, took all the fish tanks on one wall, threw them into the other. The water then flowed down the stairs into the rest of the store. And they were out of business for a month because of that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What are the odds? God. Oh, no.
Yeah. So, needless to say, I didn't have a pet shop to watch while they went to his graduation. Okay. So, I thought maybe this would be a good time for you to talk about your podcast, which I have to tell you I do listen to. But when I saw you in Washington, D.C., there was one thing I told you that you can't do, and what's that?
No F-bombs, which is, I am restraining myself. Yeah, there are curse words in my podcast, but they're well timed and they have an impact. They have a purpose. So, which if you're gonna curse, do it well.
Yeah, I will say that, well, I was a teacher for 30 years and I've certainly heard my share, I've heard my share of bad language. And it's nothing, offensive or anything. It's just, some people say anyway, and you just, kind of throw in an F here or there. So it really doesn't bother me. But there are a few people out there over the years who have listened to my podcast and complained that maybe I referred them to someone who had a bad word in there or something. So it's just a little warning, but it's actually a very, very good podcast. So why don't you tell everybody about it?
Thank you. Yeah, I'd love to. It's called Well, That's Interesting, and it's a comedy science-y podcast. I like to say for weird people who like learning about weird stuff. Every week, I tackle a brand new odd discovery, and that odd discovery can be anything from, just the staggering news that's coming out about black holes. It seems like it's coming out every week, to the more face value weird, which is, let me think of a topic I just recorded.
Well, you just did turbidity currents. I know that. Well, you may not know they're called turbidity currents because I was a geology major. But basically, you had an avalanche that caused a major slide off Canada.
Oh, yes.
That was, I think, in 1929 or something. Then you talked about one that happened, tens of thousands of years ago. So anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off. Continue.
Yes, the underwater avalanche that happened in, I think it was 1908 in Canada. Yeah, that caused a gigantic tsunami. But underwater avalanches, as though the ocean is not terrifying enough, there are underwater avalanches that happen all the time. And you don't think something like that would affect your life, but they could slice through internet cables like a hot knife in butter, which is really interesting. That's something we have to think about as we expand. So that's something I bring up in that particular episode.
Oddly, as I'm listening to that, of course, I'm older than you because I'm in my early 60s. About 40 years ago when I was in college, a geology major, I remember them talking about that story, that the way they discovered these things was that the telegraph cables were cut.
Yes.
And because they went across the Atlantic, I think it was like maybe the first 8 or 9 cables were just due to the actual collapse, but then the remainder of them, they could actually time them as the turbidity current, as this underwater avalanche moved, it would knock out cable after cable after cable, and they could then calculate the speed at which this avalanche was moving.
Just insane, frightening, also just mind-boggling that they could calculate how fast this avalanche was moving through the destruction that it caused. It's just staggering, the numbers that they come up with. It happened off the coast of Morocco about 60,000 years ago, and it was though a skyscraper traveled the distance of like Germany. It was just horrifying. And one of the the jaw-dropping like moment was when the researchers were like, it didn't start with an earthquake or a volcano or any type of monumental like impact. It was just a small landslide and it snowballed and it kept going. And that was the first time these researchers or anyone in that field saw something like this. And they were like, we should probably take a note that this is that this is possible, and we should probably think about where we're laying these cables, because we're laying them where we think would be like a generally safe area in our environment. But one of the most devastating avalanches known to humankind started with a minor landslide. Cue Stevie Nicks. So it's like that's topics like that, parasites ending up in people. As one of my favorite topics is humans being accidental hosts to parasites. That's a thing that happens quite often. One of my favorite episodes right now, it's always like the last episode that I record, and it was this is something that a lot of people know, but I did a really good face plant into the topic, was how Poland their water supply is monitored by 8 clams and 1 computer, which is like you shake your head like, okay, what am I supposed to do with that information? How does that work? But it's this one water filtration plant is like leading biometrics and biomonitoring, where every 35 million gallons flows to this plant every day, and it supplies water to 54% of the agriculture of Poland. I mean, like life or death are riding on these 8 clams. And I go into the science of how it works. I even show a few clips or share a few clips of documentaries about these clams and the people who genuinely love working with them. Just fantastic. There's also a beautiful documentary. In Polish, it's gruba kaska. And that's the name of the plant. But in English, it means Fat Kathy. So that's the name of this plant. It's affectionately called Fat Kathy. The documentary is free on Vimeo if you want to check it out. It's an Eastern European documentary, very artistic, existential. I loved sharing parts of that documentary because it was to juxtapose 8 clams and the severity of the situation is just comedic genius. And that's this podcast where the science is just funny. You know, a lot of podcasts give you the facts. They give you like or like your TikTok, your Instagram, you have 30 seconds about the story, but this will give you 30 minutes. And I give you more like a journalistic dive into the story, into the discovery. And I just love doing it. I affectionately call my audience the flock, and that flock has grown over the 4 years. It's fantastic. So please come on by wherever you listen to your podcasts. It'll be there. It's called Well, That's Interesting.
Now, I seem to recall when I met you in DC, you're not a science person, though, right? Your background's not science?
Oh, my background is I was English major. I wrote fiction. I wrote short stories. But a part of me, deep down, there's like a nerd that just needs this kind of stuff. And there was a point in my life where I'm like, you know what? I think I can take my uh my love of crafting stories and t looking at these dense, studies, and I bet you I can make a story out of that. And that's exactly what it is. You're gonna meet the researchers behind that study. You're gonna learn about the place where the study was held. You're gonna learn about the animals or the parasite or the telescope. It's like you're gonna get like those little bits and bobs that create the story and make it three-dimensional. And that's part of the joy for me is creating something like that. And the fact that people actually listen is blows my mind.
Yeah, I feel the same way because oddly, I'm doing kind of a history podcast. It's more of a general interest podcast, but I'm not a historian. I was a science teacher, for 30 years. And I started collecting these stories simply kind of, when you have a dull moment in class, something to kind of fill space. And I realized the kids really liked them. So it's not really where my focus was either. I don't really do history. I kind of avoid that because there are some real history nuts out there, and I know they can bury me if I really get into.
Yes.
I just did a story maybe about 3 podcasts ago about Winston Churchill, and he was walking across a street. I think it was 1931, walking across a street, Fifth Avenue in New York City, and got run over by a car. And he was in the hospital for a while. And
I shouldn't laugh at that, but
yeah. But anyway, he handled it very well. I mean, he didn't like accuse the driver of, he didn't sue him or anything like that. In fact, he met the guy and said it was all his fault and, not the driver's fault, took full blame for not looking in the correct direction. Because obviously he was from England. He looked the wrong way because the traffic goes in reverse.
oh,
And I just thought it was a nice story, but my fear was if I put something out there on Winston Churchill, holy cow, there's so many people who know so much about him, and I don't. Anyway, it also reminds me that every once in a while I get a comment, one of those 1 stars or 2 stars on iTunes, whatever. And one of them, my wife and I did a review of Sunset Boulevard, the movie. And I had never seen it. And someone posted basically, you call yourself an English teacher and you've never seen Sunset Boulevard? But there's no way to respond. I can't say, well, I never said I was an English teacher. And then I've had a few comments about like, you're a historian, you didn't know something. But, if you put your stuff out there, you got to be prepared
mhm.
that there are people who just will say, I don't know. I think the anonymity of the web allows people to say things they would never, ever say to your face. But overall, things have been very positive, and I'm sure you found the same thing.
Oh, absolutely. I'd say 95% of every review is just people wanting to enjoy themselves. You know, they enjoy the podcast, they enjoy interacting with the community, either online or face to face. And then you get, the occasional comment that it's so personal and so niche to them that it's like, okay, that's all right. You can feel that. That's okay. Um, the F-bomb situation. Yeah, I'd say most of my 1-star reviews are
Hmm.
this is a great podcast, but I can't let my kids listen, or this is a great podcast, but this is it's just too much. And I'm like, well, I don't think I curse more than your average podcast, but
Hmm.
I believe in timing. So when I drop the F-bomb, that's why you feel it so hard. It does sometimes come out of nowhere, or there's been like 10 minutes of clean writing, and then suddenly there's an expletive, and it's like, whoa, okay, all right, I got it. And it's I think growing up in Brooklyn, you kind of appreciate the art that is your cuss word. It is a comedy podcast also, so it is about timing and
Hmm.
finding the lighter side of things.
Yeah, I have to say I definitely enjoy it. I taught science for 30 years. I retired, and I honestly don't think about science at all. Yours is the only thing I still have any contact with science with, basically, unless there's something on the news at night or something. But in general, I've kind of closed the door on that.
Yeah.
I was asked over the summer to return to my position. They couldn't get the person who replaced me left after 3 years, and they advertised for a new position, new teacher, and no one applied all summer. So at the end of the summer, they asked me if I would consider doing it again, and I said no, because my mind is not there anymore. It would be very difficult. There's something about the momentum you have when you do it, day after day, year after year. But once you stop and your mind is elsewhere, I think it'd be very difficult to jump back into that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Like we discussed, I'm not a scientist. Why I do this show is simply out of just curiosity and just love
Hmm.
discovering something new. And I discover it just like with the listener, if it's new to them, it is new to me. About a week ago, before you heard that, it was completely new to me. And I just dived into that topic,
Right.
and I'll have several pages written, 10, 20 pages written about it. And I just want to share it with whoever will listen. So that's where I'm at, where I still have that excitement. So can I do it for 30 years? I don't know. I don't know how you do it.
Yeah. People have asked me when I'm going to stop, and I think that day is coming. I'll be at 18 years in January. I think if I can get a full 20 years out of it, that's a nice solid body of work.
Incredible.
I'm certainly not as productive as other people. I have other interests.
Mhm.
I don't want to sit at a computer, every day, day in and day out. So, to me, this is kind of a hobby that got out of hand. I think the nicest thing is, I don't know how much, if you ever hear from anyone that you talk about. Have you ever had like a scientist contact you or anything like that?
Yeah, oh gosh, one of my favorite interactions was actually pretty recent. As a podcaster, you probably know that around when this happened, when YouTube is like, or Google was like, we're going to end Google Podcasts and everything's going to be shoved into YouTube. So that transition happened, and I was kind of nervous about it. I'm not into video. I do strictly audio. So I wasn't really sure how YouTube, like that universe, would welcome my podcast, because right now it's just audio. So anyway, the RSS feed is pushed into YouTube, and just a couple of days later, I get an email from this gentleman. Of course, I forget his name because I'm terrible with names. But
Don't worry about it.
yeah. He's like, I found your podcast on YouTube, and I'm the researcher who did the cockatoo study. And this was a couple of years ago. I covered a story on how cockatoos, when given the opportunity, they could learn to play miniature golf. And they have dexterity. They understand like how to do the game, and like this guy built a miniature golf course for several cockatoos, and I just dive into the study and how like the names of each cockatoo, and how some cockatoos didn't want to play because they were like, I don't want to do this. They like refused to play. There was one cockatoo that would just take the club and like destroy the miniature golf course. Horrible. And then there were the ones that actually like enjoyed the game. They would put the ball into the hole, and like they would get their treat. And anyway, it was the study was how each player had their way of playing, like the way that they would use their beak and their tongue. And anyway, long story short, the guy's like, "Thank you for covering this study. Like it really warmed my heart." I'm like, "This is incredible." And like now this researcher is like listening to my podcast and like recommends the podcast to other researchers.
I just tend to focus on things from before I was born. And every once in a while, I do hear from somebody associated with a story, maybe a child or a brother or a sister or a grandchild or something like that. And it's quite nice. It just adds a little something legitimacy to the story. My favorite one, I think, was I was doing a story on a girl who had cancer in her eye. She's a little girl. And I did the story, and as I was finishing it up, I was looking through Ancestry and I found her son. And I just sent a message off, and I didn't hear anything for a couple of weeks. And right after I put the story out, or right as I was putting it out, he emails me and he goes, I didn't know we didn't know until after my mother died that she had a glass eye. We found it in a drawer one day, and we didn't know the story. Now we know the story. So I actually filled that in for them.
It's, oh wow. That is How did they not know?
Well, they
That is
probably never
wild.
saw her. Well, I should add that she died when they were very young. The cancer
Ah,
did come back. So she, they were probably, 5 or 6 years old or
gotcha,
something.
gotcha.
It's been a few years since I did that story, so I don't remember the exact details.
Yeah,
But, what it's like, wow, I told you why she had a glass eye. You didn't know.
yeah.
So that's what makes this worthwhile. So anyway, maybe we should move on at this point.
Let's do it.
Now we're going to move on to a section where I just do little shorts. These are just read word for word because there's really not much more research to them. And let me read the first one to you. This first story is titled A Good Word for Homely Girls, and it appeared on page 2 of the January 12th, 1885 edition of the Wisconsin State Journal. And there is a note that it's a reprint from the Pittsburgh Dispatch. Now, this is written as a conversation between two men, and no names are given, just that one's identified as being an observant and intelligent gentleman, and the second goes unidentified, but for simplicity's sake, I'll just call him Gentleman 2. Here we go. Why are homely girls the best scholars, the best workers, and make the best wives? This question was propounded by an observant and intelligent gentleman who had been twice led to the hymeneal altar and is ready to be sacrificed again. The intelligent gentleman asked, "Is such really the case?" The second gentleman answered, "I have reason to know that it is. It is natural enough, isn't it? The girl who is handsome in feature and form concludes very early in life that these are her stock in trade, and with them she enters the matrimonial market. 9 times out of 10 she is off the hooks at the head of the house. Her homely sister has hardly entered her teens until she discovers she is made to stand aside for the pretty-faced girls. All that neatness of dress, elegance of manners, and proficiency in arts of making oneself attractive she does, deliberately and for a purpose perhaps, or possibly for no other reason than Topsy-like she grew that way. The chances are she does it solely for the purpose of compensating for her lack of physical beauty." "My observations led to the opposite conclusions," replied the intelligent observer. "There is among the great laws of nature one known as a law of compensation, and I am thoroughly convinced to it that the homely girl is indebted for the tastes and disposition that prompt her to make herself useful when she cannot be ornamental." The second gentleman then asks, "Then if you had the choice of 2 ladies, one very beautiful and the other very homely, you would take the homely one?" To which the intelligent gentleman replied, "Experience and observation both teach me that would be the wise thing to do. The first impulse would naturally be to take the prettier of the 2, but I would give the first impulse time to pass off and to act upon the sober second thought." The article concludes, "The older gentleman may be entirely right in this matter."
This article is just, it cracks me up because the title is, it's a good word for homely girls. Like, this is like, oh, don't worry. Here's some positive words for you. Oh, gee, thanks.
Interestingly, my wife, who, we've been together now 20 years, but, she's I think, a very attractive woman. I had given up on dating, and one of my students actually fixed us up. He
Oh,
comes in one day and he goes, "I found the perfect woman for you." And I actually wrote about this in my 3rd book because I dedicated the 3rd book to my wife, and I told the story of how we met. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, but he walks in one day, and he had been a student of mine 2 years prior. And he was just looking to get out of class. And one day he walks, he goes, "I found the perfect woman for you." And I'm like, "Go away." I'm just joking with him. And this is going on for a couple of months. And he goes, "She's really, really pretty. You should go out with her." And I'm thinking, you're 16 years old. Pam Anderson is your version of pretty. That's not what I want. But, right before Thanksgiving, he one day walks in and he goes, "Here's her email. I told her you would email her." I'm like, "What?" And then he goes, "I want to be invited to the wedding." He was that sure we were perfect for each other. So eventually I contacted her. I didn't think we were a match, but mainly we were so different. But it actually turns out we were a match. And he was the first person we invited to the wedding. So
oh my goodness. That is, I love that so much. That's, you should go into
yeah.
that business. Wow.
But there's a lot more to that story. I'm just really giving the brief overview of it. But yeah, who would have ever imagined? So, but this idea of homely girls, pretty girls, I don't think it carries much weight. But it is 1885. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. This one you're going to do.
This incredible piece of news came from the St. Louis Dispatch in 1903, and the title is Mail Order Bride Rejected, and the subheader states, Mrs. Mary J. Fleming's St. Louis object matrimony advertisement mentioned $100,000, comma, still invisible. And it begins, Omaha, Nebraska, February 21st. Quote, an attractive, middle-aged widow with one son and a fortune of $100,000 would like to correspond with temperate, industrious widower who would appreciate comfortable home for his children. Object, matrimony. End quote. This is the paragraph that is responsible for David W. Fleming's presence in the divorce courts. 4 months ago, he commenced a correspondence with a St. Louis woman who is now Mrs. Mary J. Fleming and the plaintiff in the divorce suit. Her plea? Cruelty. Fleming is before Judge Day, resisting the suit for separation and alimony. The children the Flemings were so anxious to make a home for are the cause of the rupture. Fleming has 5 children, the oldest 18 years of age. The outcome of the correspondence was that his mail-order bride came from St. Louis and was married the evening of her arrival. The petition in the suit admits they got along splendidly for 2 days. Then the defendant's oldest daughter is said to have taught the little ones to resist the new mother's authority and even to slap and kick at her. It developed in the testimony of Mrs. Fleming that the $100,000 she told her husband about is tied up in a suit at Covington, Indianapolis.
So just real quickly, the woman claimed she had $100,000. That's around $3.4 million today. So my hunch is it never existed.
That's exactly right.
But second, the reason I chose this, it's not the most exciting article, but from what I've been reading over the years, people claim this is the first article ever to use the term mail order bride. That's why I selected it.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
I did find out her real name was Jenny Crane. She was 40 years old when they got married. He was 41. And I was able to find a little bit more about this article. First of all, I should, for the sake of transparency, we should mention that I provided you with everything, including my recordings of these stories, and you recorded yours beforehand. That way you wouldn't have to spend endless hours with me. So we did record these in advance, and you did make a slight little error. You said Covington, Indianapolis, and it's actually Covington, Indiana, but no big deal. So I should also throw in one last little thought about that is I did do a little more searching and he did declare bankruptcy after this. So I'm guessing she didn't get much.
No one wins, but they did blame the kid, so that's good.
Anyway, since you were an English major, you know the difference between an adjective and a noun, right?
Yes, sir.
So I thought it would be fun to do a short Mad Lib. Remember those?
Oh my gosh, yes, let's do it.
Okay, so give me an adjective, whatever pops in your head.
Purple.
Another one?
Round.
A noun.
Plastic. I know. Well, sorry, no. See, that's
Is
just
noun a plastic?
terms.
Yeah, I guess it could be a descriptive term or a noun, I guess, right?
Let's change that. Okay, how about a plastic bottle then?
Okay, I'm gonna have a tough time reading this one back. A number.
Ooh, 8.
An adjective.
Sloppy.
Sloppy. Another adjective. I should tell you, there's a lot of adjectives in this one.
Happy.
And the last adjective.
I would say, ooh, see, now I'm overthinking it. Let's say tall.
An animal.
Let's stick with birds.
And a noun.
Ooh, a bus.
Okay, so what I did is I took her personal ad and I just removed some of the terms.
Oh my God, let's hear it.
Okay, you ready? Here we go. This is going to be tough to read without me bursting out laughing. A purple round widow with one plastic bottle and a fortune of $8 would like to correspond with sloppy, happy widower who would appreciate tall home for his birds. Object, bus.
Again, genius. Mad Libs are just a genius thing.
Yes. Okay, my turn. Next, we have a fun story. This is from the front page of the Hutchinson, Kansas News Herald. This was published on November 23rd of 1937. And the headline on this one is Cranks Car and Gear and Wild Dash has begun. Bulldogging a frisky steer would be child's play compared to the task assigned to Victor Starkweather, 19-324 Justice, shortly after last midnight. It was a case of brainless science gone berserk in a revolution against man, and the movie should pay Victor for the copyright. When Victor twisted the crank, his car was on the west side of Maine, just north of Sherman. The motor roared, the gears clashed in reverse, and the driverless auto was waltzing in the middle of Main Street. The youth gave chase, the car dodged, circled, smashed into the window of the furniture store at 11 North Main, and headed for the center of the street again. Victor made a flying leap for the steering wheel, but the crafty machine jounced him to the pavement, spun again, crashed into the wall between the furniture store and Cantwell's jewelry store, 9 North Main, rebounded over the sidewalk and stopped by crumpling the fenders of a parked car owned by Sam Fotopoulos, proprietor of the chocolate shop, 15 North Main. I've done a few stories like this over the years. One that pops in my head is about a family in Miami, and they spotted a monkey in their backyard in a tree. And of course, everybody runs outside to see this, and the son ends up getting bitten by red ants. So they take the kid, dunk him in some water, and the mother, of course, is in a panic and forgot to turn the stove off. Next thing you know, the grease has burned her curtains and scorched some of the woodwork in the kitchen. And when they were cleaning up all the mess, if my memory serves me right, they threw all that stuff into the washing machine, and one of the kids opened the washing machine and, of course, flooded the kitchen. So it's just kind of one of those one thing leads to another type things, you know?
Very sitcom, very early 80s sitcom situation.
Yes, definitely.
Like Full House. Like the bulldogging, the frisky steer sounds like a Mad Lib in itself. I want to use that. I have to use that line somewhere. It's today. I'll use that.
Yeah, that's definitely the work of someone who knows how to write catchy lines, you know? Okay, Jill, so you're reading the next one.
This breaking piece of news, which I think should be on page 1, it's on page 74 of the Chicago Tribune back in 1948, and the headline is Champaign Majorette uses her head. Now she has a headache. Champaign, Illinois, October 2nd, Associated Press. Celia Slavins started out to lead the parade last night, but the parade passed her by. In fact, it stepped right over her. Celia, a Champaign High School student, is a drum majorette. She was leading the Champaign Band's halftime performance during a football game. She became the victim of the drum major's occupational hazard. Celia knocked herself out. Quote, "Only my pride was injured," she said today as she practiced baton twirling.
I just feel like that's something I would do. And I just feel like, and they just like stepped over her because, you know, the show must go on. Well done.
Yeah, I've done a few stories like this. In particular, what pops in my head are people who walk into panes of glass. They don't see them. There was one, I want to say it was from 2012. I could be wrong on this. I've been going back and putting these old stories onto my website. So it could have been 2012, 2016, who knows. But this couple, the wife is pregnant. She gives birth in the car on the way to the hospital. And he's in such a panic when they finally get to the hospital. He thinks he's walking through the door, but actually walked right into the window. And next thing you know, they're treating him in the hospital, you know.
He's in the bed right next door.
Right, exactly. Okay, and I'll do the last one. The story's from the July 16th, 1967 edition of the Akron Beacon Journal on page 5. Mapless trips coming? New York Times Services, Detroit. General Motors Corporation is working on a system to eliminate the motorist's needs for maps and road signs. The company's received a $493,000 federal contract to develop hardware for and to evaluate a highway route guidance system. In such a system, a future motorist would dial a destination code into guidance gear in his car at the start of his trip. The gear would automatically transmit the code to roadside equipment at key points along the way. After processing the code, the roadside equipment would transmit directions back to the driver through voice sent through his radio or with a visual display in the car. Okay, so I did a quick conversion here. The $493,000 that they put into this would be about $4.6 million today. And clearly the reason I chose this was pre-GPS. I don't know if this ever happened, but clearly the whole idea of GPS can be seen there. Dialing in, get the directions back, and then following that along,
The future is now, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have the flying cars or self-driving cars, and we won't, but we do have GPS, which
Yes, which I have to say is great, although people can't read maps anymore. You give someone a map and they don't even know how to hold it, which way is up. But yeah, I did a little checking. The GPS or Global Positioning System was started by the Department of Defense in 1973. But what they did is they clamped it down. They for civilian use, they would only allow down to about 100 meters or 330 feet. So you couldn't get that precise location if you're using a civilian version. But of course, the military had the exact location. Then when the Iraqi war broke out, the first one in the early 90s, it turns out, because back then the equipment was quite cumbersome, the military didn't have enough pieces of equipment. So the guys in the military started purchasing these commercial ones, and the government had no choice but to open up, the exact positioning to these, consumer models, the consumer devices. And then when Clinton was president, he decided, hey, you know what? Let's allow everybody to use this. Because today they can actually jam it where they couldn't do that years ago. So now there's no need to really have that limitation in there.
it's fascinating and also just horribly depressing that it all comes down to they needed to bomb someone more accurately.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
where the technology came from.
The one thing that's true about mankind is there are wars all the time. One ends, and sadly, there's another one. Just always conflicts around the world. The ones we have right now will end, and then there'll be something else. Okay, so I told you at the end of the podcast, we come back to the question of the day, which was, what was the 14th state? Now, obviously, it's not going to be something on the West Coast or something like that. It would probably be somewhere along the Eastern Coast, right? Or close to it. So what do you think?
Oh, I love that you pick a topic that I don't even have any half-assed information on. It's just
Well, when you hear it, it'll seem really obvious, but I wouldn't have a clue either. I just, over time, I just collect these things. I'll see a little piece of trivia because I really don't do trivia. Trivia is like knowing how many men walked on the moon, that kind of stuff. And that's not really what I'm into. I'm more of a storyteller.
I know more of that. I think it's been about 10. I don't, no, it hasn't been 10. Sorry about that. I think it's
Do you know how many men?
Um, I just did an episode where I recorded an episode where one gentleman, one astronaut, they were just horsing around after they did their study, like after they planted all the scientific devices, and they had a couple of minutes before they had to hop back onto their shuttle, and so they decided to do what they called the Lunar Olympics, because the Olympics were going on at the same time while they were on the moon. The Earth was doing their Olympic thing, and they're like, you know what we should do? We should do the long jump. And one astronaut, he was smart. He held on to the back of a piece of equipment and he started to jump. And of course, it's impressive because the moon has like a sixth of the Earth's gravity. So he was like 2 or 3 feet in the air. And the other guy, he's like, oh man, I got to get in on this. And he's just out there alone, not hanging on to anything. And he jumps, and very impressive. But then he realizes, I have to land. And he's wearing a 300-pound suit that has a backpack that weighs just as much as him. And he starts to fall, and he falls full force on his back. And that backpack has his oxygen. It's a cooling system, you name it. It's his life support system. And like for a good 30 seconds, he's like, I just killed myself because I jumped on the moon. And long story short, he survives. And he was the 10th man on the moon. So and the youngest. He was 30 something years old. So he could have been the youngest person on the moon, the 10th person, and the first person to die if he really messed up. But luckily he survived. So there's
Yeah,
been
I've
at
heard
least 10 people on the moon.
I have heard that story before. Also, when they sent the first mission to the moon, Nixon had two speeches ready to go, one if they survived and one if they didn't.
Yeah.
And you can go online and actually, read the text of what he had prepared to say. Now, the answer is there's actually 12 men that have walked on the moon.
Well,
I believe that three are still alive. I looked at that recently. I believe three men are still alive. That is if you believe man actually walked on the moon. I've had so many students over the years. I was just telling somebody this the other day. I remember when a student walked in for the first time. It's got to be, 15, 18, 20 years ago. Kid just walks in and goes, I was watching this show on Fox, not Fox News, Fox, the cable, the channel. And he goes, they had this thing on the moon hoax. And he's just going at me with like this reason and that reason and this reason, and I was totally unprepared for it. And he was convinced that man never walked on the moon. And I remember turning to him and saying, I need to think about each of those things, but I can tell you this: I was a kid when man walked on the moon, and you couldn't have made a worse footage. If this was a Hollywood production, there would have been explosions and everything else. And this is just like little I can't even describe it. Almost like they had little magnetic images, little magnetic pieces of the lunar orbiter and things like that they would move around. It was just really, really boring and not very well done. And people don't realize how long it took them to get to the moon. I think it was 3 days. So it was just like tedious. So, that's all I remember responding to that with. Okay, so let's get back to the 14th state. You have no idea.
Any clue? Can you throw me like a clue?
New England state.
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna be so embarrassed. Oh no, I can hear people yelling. They're just yelling at their
No, so you're in the same boat as me. I'm not a historian. I would have not known
yeah.
this. I'm sure most historians know this,
Mhm.
but and you're not a historian either. So I don't really intend people to know these answers. It's just more to throw it out there.
All right. If it's the East Coast, New England. I'm thinking either like New Hampshire, no, New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut. I don't know.
You're
I don't know.
choose one of those three.
Oh no. Okay. This is no, this is worse than picking an adjective. Uh, okay, it's one of those three. I feel like New Hampshire was already, and Connecticut, it's just so big. It's just too much. I'm gonna say Vermont.
You are correct.
Oh my God.
And the reason for
No, 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 I'm not. No.
Yeah, you are. So it was the 14th state. It was admitted to the Union on March 4th of 1791. And the reason why it wasn't, I didn't know this, again, not being a historian, this was due to a dispute over whether Vermont was part of New York or not. New York claimed it for their own. New Hampshire, I believe, also claimed it to be their own, but New Hampshire had already ceded it, saying it wasn't theirs anymore. But New York refused to give it up. And once New York said, no, no, we'll give it up, then it was able to become a state. Now, I don't know if you know this, but it's actually the second least populated state. There's only 647,000 people living there. Wyoming, of course, is the least populated. We are recording this before the presidential election, although it will be going live after. Because there's so few people living in those states, if you vote in Wyoming, that's equal to 2.79 people voting in New York. That's the weight of your vote.
Whoa.
Yeah, if you live in Vermont, your vote for president is equal to 2.71 votes here in New York also. Now, you're living in Maine now. It doesn't apply because it's not a winner-take-all state. So you can't really do that calculation. Of course, the site that I used, which was looks like VoteCalc at alexcastronovo.com, doesn't mean that's correct, but that's where I looked. And there's a calculator where you could plug in what state to what state, and it gave you the comparison.
Wow. First, my mind is blown that I got it right. That's just we should look into that further. I love that nobody wanted Vermont. That's something. And damn, Wyoming, that's not fair. that's yeah, we should look into the whole
Yeah, that
one person vote thing.
as I said, we're recording this before the election, and of course, when this goes live, we will have a new president either way. And I personally keep my politics out of it, so I'm not going to say anything there. And I think maybe that's a good place to end the podcast. Actually, when we'll have a new president soon. We'll have a new president soon, and I'm glad you came on with me. And why don't you again mention what your podcast is?
Well, first, Steve, thank you for having me on. I have not stopped smiling since we started recording.
Well, that's good.
It's been fantastic, and thank you for everyone tuning in. I hope everything's going well on the other side after the election. Again, you can find my podcast, Well, That's Interesting, anywhere you listen to podcasts. So please join the flock. I'd love to have you.
Yes, it is a very good podcast, except for the occasional foul word that's in there. So I'll be back. Actually, I'm giving a talk at our local community college shortly. And actually, by the time this goes live, that will have happened. But I'm first putting up an in-between episode, and then this will go live probably in about 2-3 weeks or so. So anyway, Jill, this has been a lot of fun. As I said, I really enjoyed meeting you when we were in DC. And as soon as I met you, I was like, I got to have this woman on my podcast. You're just so full of life. And it's always a joy to see someone who smiles all the time. So, and I do encourage people to listen to your podcast. And I guess we should just say that we're both part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes. It's a wonderful family. So if you love this show, and I know you do, you're going to love every other podcast on that network. So please tune in.
Yes, airwavemedia.com to check that out. Anyway, again, thanks for joining me, and let's say goodbye to everybody. Bye.
Bye.